you're scratching at the surface of what my biggest complaint and fear is. I am not surprised that the government exercised dictatorial powers because the government doesn't care about human liberty. It just cares about power and staying in power. And if the government can give the impression that it's doing something, it will stay in power. What has crushed me and broken my heart is how Americans accepted this, how we laid down and allowed them to close churches, to close schools. Well, the government owns the schools, but to interfere with freedom of travel, with freedom of assembly, even with freedom of speech. I mean, not far from where I am now in this beautiful countrified area on Palm Sunday, 2 Palm Sundays ago, a Catholic priest was distributing palms wrapped in cellophane outdoors to people in their cars, and the state police broke it up. The cars were too close to each other, and they were too close to this priest as he physically handed them the palms wrapped in cellophane. And I went berserk on air and in my writings because the governor who ordered this appeared at a Black Lives Matter rally, and the part of the Black Lives Matter that I think is absolutely legitimate. There were 3,000 people there. They weren't masked, and he was the featured speaker. So this is an example of the government using power to promote its own power, and the American public accepted it.
Let's move on to Russia, because you've taken the position that I fully respect, because it's hard to get any sort of sense out of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, that sanctions actually violate the Constitution. So can you explain that a bit?
Sure. And this is not anti-Joe Biden. I honestly believe he's doing everything he can, short of war, to resist Putin. I also believe that Putin's ultimately going to win, and that by our arming the Ukrainians, we're probably making it worse, bloodier, and more deadly. However, the sanctions fall into 3 categories: seizing assets, freezing assets, and interfering with contracts. So under the 4th Amendment, if the government freezes a bank account, they freeze your bank account, for example, you can't take any money out. That's a seizure. And under the 4th Amendment, the government can only seize something with a search warrant after they demonstrate to a judge, like I signed hundreds of these, a probable cause of crime. So if they seize your yacht in the Bay of Naples, if the Carabinieri, which is the Italian version of the FBI, seizes your yacht in the Bay of Naples and they won't let you on it, and they've sent it to Port Newark so that the feds can actually own it and sell it, they have seized your property illegally. If they've frozen your bank account without a search warrant, they have frozen your bank account illegally. If they have interfered with lawful commercial transactions, if, for example, you're an importer of Stolichnaya vodka and you've paid for a cargo ship full of Stolichnaya and it arrives at Port Newark or Chicago or Detroit, and the feds send it away, well, then the feds have interfered with your lawful commercial transactions. The 5th Amendment says if the government wants life, liberty, contractual rights, or property, income from the contract, they have to have a jury trial at which fault is proven. Now, under what basis is President Biden engaging in these sanctions? There's 2 statutes, Dave, that the feds enacted. One is the International Economic Emergency Act of 1977, Carter era. One is the Magnitsky Act of 2016, Obama era. Both of these statutes allow the president, without any evidence or judicial process whatsoever, to declare a human being or an entity, foreign human being or foreign entity, a violator of human rights, and seize their assets. And if they want the assets back, if you're this billionaire whose yacht was stolen by the Carabinieri and you want it back, you have to come to America, submit to the federal court jurisdiction, which they're never going to do because they're afraid they'll get arrested for some trumped up charge.
Right.
And then you have to prove that you're not a human rights violator. How do you prove a negative? And that's Alice in Wonderland. You're in a federal court, the government wants your property, and you have to prove that you're not what they say you are? Forget about it. The government has the burden of proof. The person whose life, liberty, or property the government wants always is presumed innocent and to presume to be the valid owner of the life, liberty, or property. So these two statutes, which have not been challenged constitutionally, because these foreigners are not going to come here to challenge them, give the president dictatorial powers which he has exercised.
Why do you think some of our companies, maybe that do business with Russia, say, I'll use the example that you gave. I mean, you're just an American company who's a vodka importer, who's now, your business in essence has been destroyed. I mean, should they be suing the federal government at this point?
Yes, they should.
Yeah.
Yes, they should. Look, the government, I don't know what you think of this phrase. The government loves to hate.
I like it.
Okay, so for
Mostly
200 years, the federal government hated black people, either as slaves or under Jim Crow. The federal government told us to hate the Soviet Union, and then hate Iran, and then hate Iraq, and then hate Saddam Hussein, and then, pardon this, hate COVID. Now it's hate Putin and hate all things Russian. Well, the Russian people have nothing to do with this. They have the misfortune of being governed by a dictator. I don't think he's crazy. I think he's perfectly rational, but he doesn't care about human liberty or about human life. And innocent people are being punished, are being harmed. The ruble buys about 5% today of what it bought a month ago. So you're paying $15 for a loaf of bread that should have cost $1.50.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I hope some of these companies fight that. I mean, because that's where people forget. We're now punishing Americans. These are Americans who just happen to do business with something that perhaps originated in Russia. Let's move to COVID, because you've hit it a couple times here. I mean, I'm pretty sure that anything you're going to say on the COVID front, I agree with you. I think our civil liberties have been destroyed. As you know, I fled California just in the last couple months. I now live in the free state of Florida because I could not deal with the lockdowns and the mask mandates and the general state of depression that it brought, and all of the closed businesses and the dreams that were shattered and the whole freaking thing. However, we've still got masks on planes. They've still got masks on, 3-year-olds in toddlers. Yet Joe Biden can give the State of the Union with a bunch of 80-year-olds in a room with no windows, and that's okay. What do you make of the entire freaking thing? Was this just a disaster from, we're basically at the 2-year anniversary 2 years ago? Should we have been all screaming louder and known what was coming?
Okay, so you're scratching at the surface of what my biggest complaint and fear is. I am not surprised that the government exercised dictatorial powers, because the government doesn't care about human liberty. It just cares about power and staying in power. And if the government can give the impression that it's doing something, it will stay in power. What has crushed me and broken my heart is how Americans accepted this, how we laid down and allowed them to close churches, to close schools. Well, the government owns the schools, but to interfere with freedom of travel, with freedom of assembly, even with freedom of speech. I mean, not far from where I am now in this beautiful countrified area, on Palm Sunday, 2 Palm Sundays ago, a Catholic priest was distributing palms wrapped in cellophane outdoors to people in their cars, and the state police broke it up. The cars were too close to each other, and they were too close to this priest as he physically handed them the palms wrapped in cellophane. And I went berserk on air and in my writings, because the governor who ordered this appeared at a Black Lives Matter rally, and the part of the Black Lives Matter that I think is absolutely legitimate. There were 3,000 people there. They weren't masked, and he was the featured speaker. So this is an example of the government using power to promote its own power, and the American public accepted it. I once had an argument with Roger Ailes about whether a dictator could ever take over in the United States, and he took the position it wouldn't, that the public would never stand for it. Well, when the public is afraid, the government's weapon was fear, we became a nation of sheep. And we still are, because Governor Murphy of New Jersey, Governor Whitmer of Michigan, former Governor Cuomo of New York, that mentality could come back in a week if some unnamed variant of COVID kicks in again.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversation about law instead of the nonstop yelling you get everywhere else, check out our law playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.